All right, happy Sunday, everybody. We're going to do Genesis chapter 5 today for the Bible study. So, my title for the notes I have is Boring. Now, please don't turn away because I said that. There are a lot of interesting stuff, facts and information in here, and side bits that we'll get into. But for the most part, it's pretty boring. It's a lot of genealogy and stuff. And those are the parts when I was younger and I'd read the Bible, especially because, like I've said in past videos, we don't know a lot of the side stories that the people, the Israelites of the time of Genesis being written, and up to the time of Christ and beyond, all would have known. There's a bunch of stuff that they just took for granted, the way we would take for granted David and Goliath, and that's just automatically known. They had a lot of stuff that they just automatically assumed people knew. So a lot of it's brushed over. And the first, when I was younger, in Genesis 5 was such a boring chapter. But let's get into it before I do an even worse job of selling you on this video. Verses 1 through 2. Got the King James Version here. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day when they were created. So, right there, and this is going to sound pretty obvious to most people, but the thing that I noticed is pretty funny or interesting or whatever is how Adam is the name of man. It's Adam's name because he's the first man, but that's the name of men. Again, that's an obvious thing, but it's just very interesting. So the way that Adam names all the animals, God named Adam Adam. So we're Adams. It's like in what are the books? The Narnia books, Sons of Adam and Sons of Eve. So yeah, let's move on. There's a lot. Some of the non-canonical books I have written down here before we move on. If you want to look into them, there's Jasher is a really good one for this stuff. I'm not saying it's the best non-canonical. Most of the really good ones and the most verifiable ones are from the New Testament writers. Jasher is a very old one, and the reason it's not in the Bible is simply there's not as much stuff that you can verify as far as like its authenticity. But what I always say is how much it's referenced in the Bible, which Jasher is quite a bit, and how much it lines up with the Bible is a good way to go from there. You know, if it's not referenced in the Bible, I don't even really look into it outside of just for interesting reads and stuff. But then also how far back they can date the books as well. Now, if they can date them back pretty far, like they can with, say, First Enoch and Jasher, and I think Jubilee also, that's really good, especially if they can date them back long before the birth of Christ, and also if they're referenced in the book. Those two things make it good little side bits to look into. So Jasher, a little bit First Enoch, and Jubilees are good ones for this particular chapter. Jubilees is probably the least good, I guess, but they're all not bad. Verse 3, and Adam lived an hundred. That's weird, an hundred. Just doesn't sound right to me, because I thought an was before anything started with a vowel. Side note, and Adam lived 130 years, and begat a son in his own likeness after his image, and God called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. All right, so that's verse 3 through 5. A few things I want to get into there. So, again, science doesn't have to line up with the Bible. I believe in the metaphysical, so it's not necessarily important. But I do understand the science, and it's always funny to me how much it's used against the Bible. And of course, I'll lose people, and then people call me crazy or ill-informed. But look into it a little bit. The Bible answers a lot of its critics' own questions. So we'll get into the flood of Noah later on, how the waters came from heavens and everything, and how every culture, in every single culture, has a reference to a great flood. Ancient culture. So that being said, we know now that there's, I can't remember the height exactly, but there's basically like a layer in our atmosphere when you go above like 20,000 feet in the planes, this is why a lot of like seasoned pilots don't like to fly high during the day anymore, because they go above this layer of basically like condensed water. I mean, it's H2O. I know that it comes in all kinds of states, but it's just a condensed like sheen, and it reflects and protects us from a lot of radiation. So when you fly above it, you're exposed to a lot of it. That's why a lot of seasoned pilots don't like to fly during the day, long flights international flights where they'd be above that. This is known. This is a fact. And the Bible says that the floods from heaven came down. That's probably that layer. Most likely what happens, that layer was much thicker. And that also, anyone who understands science, and tons and tons and tons of well-established scientific theologians, or just scientists who are Christians, have made the argument of how it's a legitimate theory that prior to this layer thinning, we would have lived much longer lives. So whenever you hear people talk about how long people lived in the Old Testament, there's a lot to that. Could have been a more oxygen-rich atmosphere. Or maybe it wasn't, because maybe it's less oxygen-rich. There's both arguments either way. You know, when we age, we're oxidizing, we're rusting. So less oxygen could slow that down. Less radiation because of this sheen. That's the one that's most likely. And that sheen, or that layer, would cause more different atmospheric pressure, which could be good or bad. And there's arguments either way. So whenever, also, the last one I got to make, and I'm going to make all these arguments in my next video too, so I should probably move on, but it's the fact that if you know what the second law of thermodynamics is, this everything is moving towards a state of chaos. So you're moving away from the original energy source, so it's deteriorating over time. This is a law of science, not a theory. This is a scientific law. So we are moving away from the first man, from Adam. That's why we don't live as long. I believe these things. People make arguments about different dates, so they understood different calendars and years were different amounts of time, all kinds of things like this. Legitimate arguments. And again, none of this is important to whether or not you have faith. You don't need to believe that Adam actually lived this long to believe in God and to believe in Christ and to follow his message. It's just side noise and fun to talk about. But it doesn't change anything that, it doesn't change your faith. But these guys, there's legitimate evidence that they were totally on the nose with these ages. Scientific evidence. So when people try and tell you you're ignorant or you're ill-informed, they're ill-informed. They've never taken the time to look into it. Don't believe me. Look into this stuff on your own. Like, that's the whole thing. I've never really been one to just believe what people say, at least authority figures. I do get burned a lot because I just believe friends and common people, what they say. Too trusting in that sense. But when authority figures tell you stuff, look it up, look into it. Whether it's your church authority, whether it's your school authority. Don't just, be respectful, but don't just take them at face value. You want to look into this stuff on your own. And do this. I'm telling you, you'll be fascinated at what you find. All right, so he gets Seth in his own image. We don't really have dates for Cain and Abel. Are there kids between Cain and Abel? Are there kids between Abel and Seth? Did he wait? Like, there's a lot that's unclear there. And it's just kind of killing me when it goes back to the whole Cain and Abel story of who the heck was Cain afraid of and who was his wife. I know there's people who tell you they have the answers. They don't. No one has the answers, okay? So we can question these things. And as long as Christ didn't address it, it's fine to talk about. Were the daughters in his likeness? Was Cain not in his likeness? That's just a weird way to word it to me. And everything I think in the Bible has some meaning, so I like to ask questions and try to figure out what those meanings are. I think that's important for anyone. Oh, one more theory about the ages that they have, but doesn't hold water really when you think about, especially the way it's worded, is that each one of these is a clan name. So like Seth, the next generation was a clan, and then the generation after him, each one is the clan name. That's why they last so long before the next one takes power. Theory, but it doesn't really hold water when you understand how that would work, because it says Seth is still around at the time of Adam, and why would he have a different clan? And then it becomes his clan for hundreds of years. And it talks about the death of each one person too, not the death of a clan. So, but that's what people try to do. These are, I don't mean to call people out, but I just don't like it when Christians are so quick to apologize about the way the Bible's written and the things they say. It's like, okay, so clearly you're not totally believing it. Again, you don't need to. Christ is the only truth that we need to worry about. But don't be so quick to sell out what the Bible is saying is just like up there in the pie. Oh, those lives clearly aren't accurate. No, look into it before you just assume that. All right, covered Oh, the last argument I will make for the ages. So the one bone in the body that never stops growing is like the cranial bone. And so like you find all of these old skulls. Now I'm not one of these people that says that the Neanderthals were us or weren't us, but you think about the way they look, and we do know that the cranial bone never stops growing. So if this brow bone, whatever it is, if it doesn't stop growing and expanding, we would look like Neanderthals in our late 100, like 2, 4, 5, 6, 700 years into life. And we know this. We know that this doesn't stop growing. So if the Bible's accurate and we're finding these bones, interesting, okay? Just interesting stuff. Let's move on. It's way too long on that one. Actually, it's not. You could spend hours on each verse in the Bible. I mean, I know if anyone's watching this who's new, and isn't just wanting to learn about the Bible, I'm sorry if I get way too into detail about it. But let yourself get lost. This is an interesting, fun conversation. I mean, you can look at it however you want, whether it's philosophy or whether it's mythology. Either way, it's fun to talk about. Verse 6, and Seth lived an 105 years and begat Enos. And Seth lived after he begat Enos 807 years. See, that goes against the clan theory. And begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. 912. Enos. And Enos lived 900 years and begat 90 years and begat Cainan. Not spelled like the Canaanites, but Cainan. And Enos lived after he begat Cainan after 850 years and begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Enos were 905 years, and he lived. I think Cainan in the book of Jasher is quite a heroic figure, a very godly one. I know there's a godly Canaan. I don't know if it's Canaan. Anyway, interesting stuff. And Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalalel. No, let me read that again. Mahalalel. And Canaan lived after he begat Mahalalel 840 years and begat sons and daughters, and lived all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. So I'm always curious. Now, you'll hear people say they have the exact answer, and again, they're lying to you. Most people, if they tell you they have the answer, they don't have the exact answer, especially for this stuff this long ago. Are these the eldest sons, or just like the best sons? The prodigal sons, whatever, the sons that went on to be the patriarch, not because they're the eldest, but because they're the most godly, or they're the best leaders. That's just always something I'm curious about. If it's always the eldest son that they're talking about, or if it's just the best son, the one that... Because it says they have other sons and daughters, and again, if these people, like Canaan, I mentioned in the Hebrew lore, he is a pretty big figure, and he's not talked about at all in Genesis. So especially Christians and people later on in the religion don't really know his story, which is fine because it's probably just not that important to the overall faith. But it goes back to, was he the one that they said that he begat because he was the most famous and known one? Or was it simply because he was the oldest son? I don't know. I've always wondered that. All right. So moving on. Again, like I said, these are just generations. And Mahalalel lived 60 years. This is verse 15. And 60 and 5 years and begat Jared. And Mahalalel lived after he begat Jared 830 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalalel were 890 and 5 years, and he died. All right, we're getting to the interesting stuff here. Jared is even known among modern Christians. I mean, maybe not your everyday, just living a good life Christian, but those who study somewhat regularly, even they have a pretty good understanding who Jared is, because he's getting close to Enoch, which we'll get into, Methuselah, and Lamech and Noah. So, is it great granddad? Jared's like the great grandfather or great grandfather of, or great. He's getting close to Noah, okay? Jared, with these ages, was still alive. He was the patriarch when Noah first was born. So that's why he's known by some people. All right, so verse 18. And Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch. And Jared lived after he begat Enoch 800 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Okay, now we're getting where it is interesting. And I won't get too far ahead of myself because we're about to read it, but I want to go back just a little bit and look at what we've seen so far. So I'm not going to reread everything, thank goodness, but basically from the time of Adam, after the story of Cain and Abel, it's just his generations. It's how old he was when he had either his eldest or his most memorable son. So in his case, it was Seth. And then how old he was afterwards when he died. And that's everyone after that. It doesn't give anything else about them. And it literally it says, let me just give you an example real quick, a short one. So this is Enos again, who was the son of Seth. And Enos lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And Enos lived after he begat Canaan 850 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enos were 950 years, and he died. They all end with he died. They all say the first or most famous early son of theirs. They say how much longer they lived afterwards. They say that they begat more sons and daughters with no other names. And then they say he died. So they give the age of the next patriarch, when the next patriarch was born, how old the person was then. They give the age after the years after then, and then the fact that they had more sons and daughters, the age of the death, and then they end it with he died. And that's everyone so far. Remember that. Because this throws so many people off when they read their Bible for the first time. So now we're at Enoch, son of Jared. Verse 21. And Enoch lived 65 years, and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years. Okay, so we're already at something different. That's a new thing right there. I'll read it again. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years. Walked with God. And begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. I'm going to read that again, okay? So, and Enoch, first off, it says he walked with God, and then it says he begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he, being Enoch, was not, for God took him. We'll read the New International Version, that last part of it, not the whole thing. Why not? I'm going to do the whole thing. Who cares? When Enoch had lived 65 years, he begat the father of Methuselah. And he became the father of Methuselah. Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God, and then he was no more, because God took him away. He didn't die. And you can say, well, that just means that they're saying the same thing. It's just God took him and we use that to explain death. No, no, that's not how it was written, okay? That's not how Hebrews wrote things. It's not how they kept records. Read the rest of your Bible. That's just not the way it is. Some books are just straight up history books. Some of them are straight up like poems. But the Genesis story is written like a history book. It's meant to be like a history book for their people. That's what it was written for. So remember that. We're reading it as a scripture. It was their history book. History and religion were one and the same for the Hebrews. This is saying that God took Enoch without him dying. Okay, and this throws so many people off. All right, I got a quick joke for you before I get into this. This is a true story, by the way. Did you know that the oldest man to ever live in the world died after or before his father? I messed that up so bad. I got caught in it. I'm going to say it again. The oldest man who ever lived died before his father died. It's Methuselah. We'll get into it. Methuselah ends up being just the oldest person ever lived. 969 years is what Methuselah lived. His father never died. A few things I want to mention about Enoch here. I'm not going to get into the scriptures that exist on Enoch other than to say you can read them all. Why not? I'm not a book burner or if your church hides information from you, that's the wrong thing to be into. There should be no hidden mysteries, okay? Even the bad stuff, it's fine to know your enemy. If not, just don't practice it, obviously. So, first Enoch is pretty legit. It's referenced throughout the Bible. It's referenced by both of Jesus's half-brothers, Jude, who's known as Jacob, and James, who is the leader of the church in Jerusalem. Jesus' half-brothers referenced it constantly. Jesus made reference to it. The Son of Man reference is used throughout the first book of Enoch. And it has more messianic, I guess, Messiah-based prophecies than any other book in the Old Testament. And all of them came true. Every one of them came true in Christ. So it's pretty legit. Anyway, the book is mentioned and referenced throughout the Old Testament and by New Testament people and by Christ's half-brothers. So we know that Jesus knew about the first book of Enoch. We know he knew about the teachings of Enoch. There was an Enoch book in the Jesus house growing up. Okay, so just be aware of that. Second and third Enoch, read them, but know that they haven't been traced back to BC. Third Enoch's real weird, and most likely they've been touched by Gnosticism and stuff like that, or just people trying to sell books using a name, And again, they haven't been traced back to BC. First Enoch has been and is referenced, and we know. Okay. Enoch's taken away. He does not die. I'm not alone on this. It's not like it's me coming up with this on my own. Tons of people have this theory. Believe that he is most likely going to be one of the two witnesses from Revelation. Enoch and Elijah, I believe, were the two people who did not die. They were taken by God into heaven. So I think those are definitely the two most likely candidates. Some of the other candidates are this guy Melchizedek. He's not known very much, but when we get to him in the Old Testament, you'll see Melchizedek. He's a good one. Another one is Moses. I think Moses is a possibility. I really do. A lot of people don't. I think a possibility might be John the Baptist. I don't really think that's a good one, though. And then the other one is whoever it was, the apostle or the disciple that Christ loved, that he references in the New Testament. When we get there a long time from now, he basically says, "So what if he's still around when I come back? You know, what is it to you?" It's basically what Jesus says to one of them. And some people have taken that to mean that this guy just hasn't died. He's still been around. I don't know. But I do think the best two most likely candidates for the two witnesses will be Enoch and Elijah, because they didn't die in the Old Testament. The only two didn't die, and they're going to be the two witnesses to the return. And what do they witness? Well, they witness the glory of God in heaven. They're going to come back down and tell us about it. All right, moving on. Make sure that's all. I'm going to make people mad here, but I'm going to say it one more time. If your religion hides information from people, you're in the wrong church. I'm going to make so many people mad, and I'm not going to call any religions out. I'm not going to say any specific names at all. But why would you be in a religion that hides or charges people money to know the religion, to know the faith? That is evil, okay? That's not good. So if you are in a religion that, say, has found archaeological evidence or has many writings and books and old scriptures, hiding them from the people, the masses, to read, even with good intentions, thinking that maybe these readings are not founded and people shouldn't be aware of them, it'll come back to bite you. It's never a good thing to hide information like that. The problem, back to Genesis 1, Genesis 2, the fall of man or whatever. Is it Genesis 3? Anyway, back to that. The fall of man, when we took the knowledge of good and evil, our problem isn't knowledge, okay? Our problem is the desire to be like God, okay? That's what the serpent tempted Eve with. That's where evil comes from. That's what is the problem with knowledge. Knowledge is a wonderful thing as long as you venerate God above all other things. Seeking knowledge for your own self-gain, your own self-worth, and your own self-service is not a good thing. Therefore, there's no reason to hide knowledge. We should not be hiding information. If you're in a religion that does something like that, be a little bit wary. That doesn't mean you're not a good person. Obviously, it doesn't mean you're not safe. Just be wary. There's nothing wrong with questioning authority. Remember that. It's exactly what Christ did. All right, moving on. Verse 25. And Methuselah lived 187 years, and begat Lamech. And Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years, and begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Oldest man to ever live, died before his dad. Actually, I was just hanging out with my girlfriend. Her roommate is pretty devout atheist. We get along just fine, obviously. But she made some comment about the oldest person ever lived is 120. It's like the oldest person ever lived is like 960 something, like back in the Old Testament. She's like, no one lived that long. I was like, I'm pretty sure they lived a lot longer back then. And we just got into a quick debate. And I'm pretty good about using humor and tact. So I was like, nah, I don't know. Atmosphere is pretty different back then. And, second law of thermodynamics pretty much states that things are always moving away from the original design. So there's no reason to be afraid to talk about these things with people. And most people won't care, as long as you're not a jerk about it. You don't have to be pushy, but don't be afraid to say what you believe to be true. Have some conviction with it. This is where knowledge is a good thing. If you have knowledge of these things, in fact, the more knowledge you have, the more you'll see that Christ is the answer, really. Just so long as you continue to use that knowledge for good to serve God. Double-edged sword, guys. All right, so here we got Lamech. It's moving on. Verse 28. And Lamech lived 182 years, and begat a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, This same shall comfort us This same. I'm going to read that again. And he called his name Noah, saying, This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. And Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, I don't have much notes for the ending there. We'll get into Noah in the next Genesis 6. Boy, Genesis 6 was going to be an intense, insane one. Because, like I said, I go over all the theories. And if you're aware of Genesis 6 and all the theories on that, whoo, whoo. All right. My last notes here are simply that I find it odd. Not really odd, I guess, but just kind of what? How everyone else, I mean, they're waiting quite a while to have their first son, which when I was younger is why I always supported the theory that they were just wrong about their dates and how they kept time or years. I've come against that lately. I think more so that it's actually the truth, but it's just how long they wait to have their kids. So Noah waits the longest here, at least to have these three. Maybe he had other kids. Again, the Bible's not like super detailed about this stuff. Maybe he only had these three good kids. The other ones didn't serve God. I'm not sure. And anyone who says they know for a fact is lying again. So maybe that's the case. But all the other ones, they had their patriarchal son at like 100 or anywhere from 60 to like 180 years old. You know, that's usually where they're having their next patriarch of the family. Again, I'm like, dang, like kids today, like growing up. I mean, not to be, maybe there's young people watching this, but you're kind of the loser if you weren't like getting with the girl by a certain age. How much society has changed is nuts. Because right here, Noah was 500 when he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, if these are their eldest sons, he waited way longer than anyone else. It's nuts to me. It's funny that that's the part that I keep ending on. Alright, so most of this stuff, like I said, it's just genealogy. If you're just reading your Bible for the first time through, and if you're like me, you'll want to look a lot of this stuff up. And you can and do that. But it's important to get through a lot of this stuff to have it as a base and then go back on it. At least I think so. Because if you don't know like the message of Christ reading through the Old, while you're reading through the Old Testament, if you don't know a lot of the stuff that's coming up, that it's foreshadowing the importance of it, it'll seem like really, really, really boring reading. Like, why? What's the point? The most exciting thing in this, obviously, Noah's here now, so we'll get into the flood and all that. But Enoch, I am telling you, that is just some crazy stuff. Growing up, Enoch was just a fascinating character because, like, as a kid, you're not aware. And I grew up before internet was real big. So, I mean, I did actually find some stuff at, like, the public library and whatnot, but there wasn't a lot about Enoch out there. I mean, you could find a few things and, like, oh, so he was kind of like a patriarch and God took him into heaven. And then, most of the stuff I found was so, like, anti his writings and teachings that it made me want to read him more. And then I couldn't figure out why the church was so against him when I read, especially First Enoch, like I said. And when they came out and found a bunch of fragments of First Enoch in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and like verified that they were from hundreds of years BC and everything, it just was more and more like, oh man, no wonder he's referenced the way he is. And the fact that there's so much in the Old Testament that the Hebrew people who wrote the Old Testament, there was tons that was just assumed. The way we would just assume that people know who George Washington is. Like, you wouldn't go into detail in a story about if George Washington was just involved in this story, but it wasn't a story about George Washington himself. you would just put that name in there and maybe a wink and a nod to be like, yeah, George Washington was there, like they do to Enoch. But you wouldn't go into detail about who George Washington is because everyone knows who George Washington is. Why would you do that? That'd be a waste of time, wouldn't it? And that's what they do with a lot of stuff in the Old Testament, including Enoch. And for us to just assume that we don't need to know these things, that's a bit of arrogance. Again, I shouldn't say that. It's not. It's fine to not know them. You don't need to know them to be saved. But it's very beneficial to be aware of this stuff, especially if you're going to try to actually spread God's message. If you're going to try and preach His word, you're trying to carry it out there to the other people, you want to arm yourself with the knowledge that comes along with it. All right, I've been talking for way too long, so hopefully everyone has a wonderful Sunday. By the way, I'm aware that I have this like lipstick right here. I was watching my nieces and nephew with my parents today, and my niece, who's about 4, my mom put her lipstick on her and told her to come give me a kiss on the cheek. So that's what that is. Yes, I'm aware of it. When I turned on the camera, I thought my sideburns just looked extra long. All right, everybody have a great day. God bless.